Hello, God bless you, and welcome to episode 66 of Unshackled Life Q&A. My name is Dalen Woodard, and I'm a Bible teacher and assistant pastor at Nacogdoches Christian Fellowship and founder of Unshackled Life Ministries in Nacogdoches, Texas. These Q&As cover questions about God, the Bible, theology, and walking with Jesus. We'll examine the questions from a biblical perspective and using biblical thinking, meaning approaching the question from a biblical worldview and using the text in context with the passage where it's found, as well as keeping it in context and agreement with the entirety of Scripture. At the end of the Q&A, I'll give you ways to ask your own questions for future episodes. Also, I'd like to thank the person who asked the question we'll be covering today. So let's get to it. Question: what happened to the lost tribes of Israel? This is going to be a fairly short and simple answer in relation to the amount of research spent preparing and how long the person who asked has had to wait for the answer. But while I have put in enough research to write a thesis, I don't think that's what's needed here. The info is out there, but there are a lot of claims with zero evidence, many suppositions, and some very erroneous theological implications based upon what may or may not have happened to the tribes that were lost. Before I go any further, I should probably mention exactly what I'm talking about here for those who haven't heard of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. So here's the history of the world, the promise, and Israel in a very simple form. Before anything existed except God, which granted is a weird thing to say because what does before really mean when there is no time? That's another question for another day. God decided to create and decided that within his creation would be beings that were made in his image, to reflect his image, created to have loving relationship with him and each other. In order for love to be true, it must be freely chosen and freely given. Therefore, free will is a necessary ingredient for true love. God knew that when he gave us free will, we'd make some wrong choices that would cause damage, destruction, and lead to death, our own and that of others. Sin, that which is opposed to and not of God, that which is not light and truth, would be given entrance into the creation and spread like disease. So, before even speaking light into existence, God purposed to send the Son, to come as one of us and pay the penalty and do the work necessary to restore us to life and relationship with our Creator, determining how and when and where the promise would come and what would be accomplished by his death and resurrection. The very first man fulfilled the role just as well as any of us would have, failing to live up to the standard of perfection required to remain free and alive and connected to God. The promise was made that through a woman giving birth to this promise in the future, redemption would come. Fast forward to several generations later, and mankind has become so evil and wicked and filled with rage and hatred and self-seeking that humanity is literally on the brink of self-annihilation. In an act of glorious mercy to save us and to spare the suffering of those who refused to be saved, God destroys all humanity except one family, and cutting back to start over with nothing but the foundation once again of God and a family who will listen and choose the way of life. We were not created to be able to live without connection to our Creator, any more than our bodies are designed to be sustained on nothing but sugar and caffeine. But sin was already here, and people are never perfect. Things grew bad again, quickly, just not yet ever as bad as they were pre-flood. A few hundred years later, God chooses a man named Abram, gives him a promise, and calls him out of his own land to journey toward a land of promise. Abram becomes the first and only Hebrew in the world at that point. Hebrew simply means one called by God who has crossed over to another place. Abram left his old life behind in pursuit of what God said would bring blessing to all the nations and all the peoples of the world. Abram has a son named Ishmael, who was not chosen for the promise, and not a Hebrew, though a child of Abraham. His new name because God will now make him a father of many nations. Yet still only one son will carry the promise, be called a Hebrew. Isaac is that son. Later, Abraham will have even more children. Yet, of all the children of Abraham, only Isaac was a Hebrew, the one called to cross over, to carry the promise. Isaac has two children, Jacob and Esau, and again, only one of the two is chosen. So there were legitimate descendants of Abraham through the chosen Hebrew Isaac that also were not Hebrews, although there was absolutely nothing different about their bloodlines. Same father, same mother, they were in fact twins. Jacob, the chosen Hebrew, son of Isaac, son of Abraham, is the first Hebrew to have all of his children, male and female, called children of the promise and or Hebrews. From then on, all the descendants of Abraham through the line of Jacob, renamed Israel, were Hebrews and part of the promise. But not all would carry the promise. The line of Judah would reign and would be the line through which the promised one would come and bring salvation to the world. It is only through Jacob's son Judah, and later through his descendant David, that God said the Messiah would come. Israel, like the rest of us, was rebellious and couldn't serve God due to the spiritual sickness we are all born with, passed from Adam to his children down to each and every single one of us as surely as our parents determine our eye color. If we are born human, we are born with a deformed spiritual nature that opposes God and wants our own will and way, even when it means our own destruction. Eventually, this rebellion becomes such a problem that God's chosen nation of Hebrews, called Israel, splits into civil war, becoming Judah in the south and Israel in the north. Judah consisted of the tribes of Judah and parts of Benjamin and Simeon, and of course some Levites. The Levites were not an official land-holding tribe and were scattered throughout all the tribes. The northern tribes contained Ephraim and the rest, and was known as Israel, Ephraim Israel, or simply Ephraim. God used exile to put a stop to the idolatry and rebellion threatening to destroy his people and interrupt the plan of redemption. When the northern tribes were invaded, a few things happened. Some of the people in the north forgot all about this civil war and fled south to live with enemy cousins rather than enemy strangers. Most were captured and carried into exile, and a small portion remained in the land. Of those captured and carried away, most were sent by the Assyrians into other occupied countries and scattered to mix into the cultures and peoples already ruled by Assyria, while other subjects of Assyria were brought in to populate the land the northern tribes had occupied. This was standard operating procedure for Assyria. Some held on to their heritage, but most simply assimilated into the rest of the Assyrian world. 10-ish of the tribes of Israel, as tribal groups, disappear as the people adapt to and integrate with the cultures around them. A little later, Judah is captured by Babylon. Judah at this point includes the tribe of Judah, the tribes that were also with Judah during the Civil War, and also the refugees from the Assyrian invasion of the northern tribes. There were people from all 12 tribes in Judah at the time of the Judean exile. Later, these peoples were returned to Judea and were called Jews, meaning of Judah. So, many of the Hebrew people descended from Jacob are at that point scattered and intermarried with peoples from all over, but there are descendants from all the tribes in the land of Judah. The largest portion, however, are of the tribe of Judah, which makes sense as it was the largest of the southern tribes, it was the ruling tribe in the south, and the tribe through which the promise would come. When Jesus arrived on the scene in the flesh to fulfill the promise, he was born right where he said he would be born, when he promised, because God had protected his purpose and his plans. Jesus lived the life we were always supposed to live but couldn't didn't want to, didn't even know how to want to enough to keep trying, died the death we should die in our place, and then rose again, bringing all those who put their trust in his work to life with him. From then on, even Gentiles, a word that simply means not a Hebrew, would have the same access to the promise as the Hebrews. We can all be a part of the chosen people now, but that doesn't change the foundation promised to Abraham about his line. There are still descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob running around today with blessings on their life because of who their greatest granddaddy was. But those blessings are temporal, and since the promise has come, even the children of Abraham must believe on him who was sent in order to be saved. They cannot put their faith in their heritage or genealogy. That could have been the end of the story. In one sense, Israel was only chosen to give the world Jesus. Once Jesus came, there was no need for a chosen nation to protect the coming Messiah. All followers of Jesus would be God's people. Still, God made promises that he has kept and will keep, including the keeping of the people of Israel and restoring the nation, something that happened in 1948. There is a promise that he will bring all the tribes back. How is that possible? How could that happen since the people intermixed with all the nations of the world? Well, thanks to genetic testing, we can see many children of Abraham are scattered all over the world. It's amazing. Much to our surprise, my wife even learned that she is 13% Jewish. So many are discovering their heritage that way. Also, there are actually small pockets of peoples in places like Ethiopia and India and Africa and Asia where the Hebrew tribal heritage was kept and practiced in exile. And some of these groups are migrating back to Israel in our lifetime. Also, we must remember that what is impossible with us is easily accomplished by God. And God can put it on the hearts of the descendants of Israel to return when he is ready, and he knows exactly who and where each of them are. So really that's the simplest way I know to say the tribes were lost in one sense, as in they no longer remain as united tribes or as 10 individual tribes, just as has also happened with the southern tribes since the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. But the people didn't go extinct or disappear. They simply mixed in with the people that conquered them, much like with the many people scattered throughout North America with indigenous ancestry who have never been on a reservation or had any association with any particular tribe or nation. Some were in Judah with Jesus and became Christians during the time of the book of Acts, which brings me to another possibility for the fulfillment of the prophecy of the return, as those who are Hebrew descendants and may not even know, who have or will become Christians, are spiritually grafted back into the branch from which their ancestors were cut off. What didn't happen with the lost tribes? They did not migrate en masse and basically form Europe or the British Isles, although there are children of Abraham that went into those areas. There were no exiled tribes that became kingdoms in other lands and are waiting to return to their true homeland. America is not the new Israel. White people are not the children of promise due to really being the true descendants of the lost tribes, something I had never even heard until exposed to the beliefs of white pride gangs in prison. And even were I wrong about the origins of the quote-unquote white race or some European nations, it wouldn't matter because the Messiah came through Judah, a Jew in every sense of the word, since again, of Judah is what Jew means, and not from any of the tribes that were supposedly lost. No matter if you are a child of Abraham or not, regardless of race, color, or heritage, we all have access to the same Jesus, have a need for the same Jesus, and are given life by the same Jesus, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, who will return to claim all those who put their trust in him and leave the rest to their desire of separation from God. One last thing about what the lost tribes are not. They are not Jews. Israelis? In the truest, most ancient sense? Absolutely. Hebrews? Sure. Children of Israel and children of Abraham? All day, every day. But they, being not of the tribe of Judah, nor a part of the exiles returned to the land of Judah, were not ever themselves Jews. As a final note, I want to mention one of the documentaries I watched during my research into this. The documentary Quest for the Lost Tribes, a Canadian documentary film directed by Simcha Jacobovici and released in 1998. The film documents his travels to various places in Africa and Asia to investigate various claims that local populations are the purported 10 lost tribes of Israel. It's extremely interesting in my opinion, and shows how this issue is being viewed and handled by the secular nation of Israel, at least as of about 25 years ago. I will include the link to the documentary on YouTube in the description of this video. Alright, thank you for listening. I hope the answer to today's question helped you in some way. If you have a question about God, the Bible, or theology, you can email your question to dalenwoodard@minister.com. That's DALYNWOODARD@minister.com. Or go to the Unshackled Life Ministries Facebook page and ask there or through DM. Find me, Dalen Woodard, on X and ask there or reply to this video on YouTube. May the Lord bless you and keep you and give you an ever-deepening hunger for His Word and for truth. Help us spread the word by sharing, commenting, and clicking that like button on YouTube. Keep up to date on the Q&As and the Bible teaching by subscribing to this channel. And remember, when you fix your thoughts on God and build your thinking on the foundation of His truth, God fixes your thoughts. Be blessed.